thought it would be simple, solve one case and earn his badge. But when a mysterious woman walked in, everything changed. What was the secret she carried, and why did it seem like it was meant for him all along? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The rain fell in steady sheets over Boston that November evening in 1895, turning the cobblestone streets into mirrors that reflected the warm glow of gas lamps. Detective Christopher Hartwell stood beneath the awning of the police department's entrance, watching the downpour with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. At 28 years old, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark wool coat and striking features marked by intense green eyes and dark hair, he cut an impressive figure. Yet tonight, those eyes held the uncertainty of a man about to embark on his first real case as a full detective. "Hartwell," Captain Frederick Morrison's gruff voice called from inside. "Stop admiring the weather and get in here." Christopher turned and walked through the heavy oak doors, his footsteps echoing in the dimly lit hallway. The police department building smelled of old wood, tobacco smoke, and the faint scent of ink from countless reports. He found Captain Morrison in his office, a portly man with graying whiskers and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Sir," Christopher said, standing at attention. "At ease, detective. You're not in the army." Morrison gestured to a chair. "Sit down. I have your first case." Christopher's heart quickened as he settled into the wooden chair. This was the moment he had worked toward for 3 years, ever since joining the force as a young patrol officer fresh from university. His dedication, attention to detail, and natural instinct for investigation had earned him this promotion just 2 weeks prior. Morrison pushed a thin folder across his desk. "Missing person. Margaret Ashford, age 63, widow of the late industrialist Henry Ashford, hasn't been seen for 4 days. Her household staff reported it yesterday morning when they found her bed hadn't been slept in." Christopher opened the folder, studying the photograph of an elegant older woman with silver hair arranged in the fashion of the day. Any signs of struggle? Forced entry? None whatsoever. That's what makes it peculiar. Morrison leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "The Ashford mansion on Beacon Hill shows no evidence of anything amiss. Her personal belongings appear untouched. No ransom note. It's as if she simply vanished into thin air. Family members. One niece, Victoria Ashford, age 26. She's been residing at the mansion since her own parents died in a carriage accident 5 years ago. By all accounts, she and her aunt were quite close." Morrison paused, stroking his whiskers thoughtfully. "The niece is the one who insisted we investigate. She's convinced something terrible has happened." Christopher closed the folder, his mind already working through possibilities. "I'd like to examine the mansion, interview the staff, and speak with Miss Ashford." I expected nothing less. Morrison pulled out his pocket watch, checking the time. "It's nearly 7 o'clock now. The household is expecting you first thing tomorrow morning at 9. Get a good night's rest, Hartwell. You'll need your wits about you. The Ashfords are prominent people. This case will draw attention." As Christopher left the office and stepped back into the rainy night, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. His first case, a missing woman from one of Boston's most respected families. He pulled his coat tighter against the cold and began walking toward his modest apartment on Charles Street, his mind already racing with questions. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the previous night's rain having given way to a heavy fog that clung to the city like a shroud. Christopher dressed carefully in his best suit, a charcoal gray three-piece with a crisp white shirt and dark blue tie. He wanted to make a good impression, to appear both professional and capable. After a quick breakfast of coffee and toast, he made his way through the fog-draped streets to Beacon Hill. The Ashford mansion stood like a Gothic sentinel among the elegant townhouses, its red brick facade and black shutters speaking of old money and established society. Christopher climbed the stone steps and used the brass knocker, its sharp rap cutting through the morning silence. A butler answered almost immediately, a thin man of perhaps 50 with a carefully neutral expression. "Detective Hartwell, I presume?" "Yes, I'm here to investigate Mrs. Ashford's disappearance." "Of course. Please come in. I am Jameson, head of the household staff." The butler stepped aside, revealing a grand entrance hall with marble floors, a sweeping staircase, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors gazing down from the walls. "Miss Victoria is expecting you in the drawing room." Christopher followed Jameson through the opulent interior, noting every detail. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, not a speck of dust anywhere. Everything perfectly maintained. They passed a study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a formal dining room that could seat 20, and finally arrived at the drawing room. "Detective Hartwell," Jameson announced. Christopher stepped into the room and felt his breath catch. Standing by the tall windows, silhouetted against the foggy morning light, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Victoria Ashford turned from the window, and their eyes met across the elegant space. She was perhaps 5 feet 6 inches tall, slender, with lustrous auburn hair arranged in an elaborate Gibson girl style that framed a face of remarkable beauty. Her features were delicate yet expressive, with high cheekbones, a graceful neck, and eyes of the deepest brown that seemed to hold both intelligence and a profound sadness. She wore a deep green dress with leg-of-mutton sleeves and a high collar, the color bringing out the warmth in her complexion. "Detective Hartwell?" she said, her voice soft but steady, carrying the cultured accent of Boston's upper class. "Thank you for coming. I pray you can help us find my aunt." Christopher found himself momentarily speechless, a most unusual occurrence for him. He cleared his throat and stepped forward, offering a slight bow. "Miss Ashford, I assure you, I will do everything in my power to locate your aunt and ensure her safe return." Victoria's expression softened slightly, though the worry never left her eyes. "Please, sit down. Would you care for tea?" "Thank you, no. I'd prefer to begin immediately if you don't mind." Christopher settled into a wing-back chair upholstered in burgundy velvet, withdrawing a small notebook and pencil from his coat pocket. "I need you to tell me everything about the days leading up to your aunt's disappearance. Even details that seem insignificant might prove important." Victoria moved gracefully to the sofa opposite him, arranging her skirts as she sat. She folded her hands in her lap, and Christopher noticed they trembled slightly. "Where should I begin? The last time you saw your aunt, what was her demeanor? Did she mention any plans, any concerns?" Victoria took a slow breath as if gathering her thoughts and composing herself. "It was 4 evenings ago, the 23rd of November. We had dinner together, just the two of us as usual. Aunt Margaret seemed distracted. Not distressed precisely, but preoccupied. I asked if something troubled her, and she said she had received a letter earlier that day that required her attention." Christopher's pencil moved swiftly across the page. "Did she show you this letter? Did she mention who it was from?" "No, she didn't share the contents, but I noticed it bore a Philadelphia postmark. I only saw it briefly when Jameson brought it to her on a silver tray during breakfast." "Philadelphia," Christopher murmured, making a note. "Did your aunt have connections there? Business associates? Friends?" Victoria's brow furrowed in concentration. "Not that I'm aware of. My late Uncle Henry conducted business primarily in Boston and New York. I cannot recall Aunt Margaret ever mentioning Philadelphia, except perhaps in passing about some distant relatives who moved there decades ago. These relatives, do you know their names?" "I'm afraid not. It was before my time, and Aunt Margaret rarely spoke of them." Victoria's voice grew quieter. After dinner that evening, she retired to her private study. She said she had correspondence to attend to and didn't wish to be disturbed. That was the last time I saw her." Christopher looked up from his notebook, studying her face. The genuine anguish there was unmistakable. "What time did she retire?" "Around 8 o'clock. I went to bed myself around 10. The next morning, when she didn't appear for breakfast at our usual time of 7:30, I thought perhaps she wasn't feeling well. But when her lady's maid, Martha, went to check on her at 9 o'clock, the room was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in." "And you're certain she didn't leave the house during the night?" Victoria nodded firmly. "Jameson locks all the doors at 10 o'clock each evening without fail. He checked them that morning, and all were still locked from the inside. The windows in Aunt Margaret's study and bedroom were closed and latched as well." Christopher felt a prickle of intrigue. A locked house mystery. So if she left, she would have needed a key. "Yes, but Jameson has the only set, kept on his person at all times." "I'd like to examine your aunt's study and bedroom if I may, and I'll need to interview all the staff members individually." "Of course." Victoria rose and Christopher stood as well. "I want you to understand, Detective Hartwell, that my aunt is all the family I have left. She took me in when my parents died, raised me as if I were her own daughter. I need to know what happened to her." The vulnerability in her voice, the way her composure threatened to crack, stirred something protective in Christopher. "I understand, Miss Ashford, and I give you my word that I will find the truth." Their eyes met again, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing in that elegant drawing room with fog pressing against the windows. Christopher felt an unexpected connection, as if some invisible thread had been drawn between them. Victoria seemed to feel it too, because she looked away first, a faint color rising in her cheeks. "I'll show you to her study." She led him back through the mansion's corridors, and Christopher found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her, the rustle of her silk dress. He mentally chastised himself for the distraction. This was his first case. He needed to maintain professional focus. The study was a smaller, more intimate room than he had expected. Dark wood paneling, a mahogany desk positioned near a window overlooking the garden, shelves filled with leather-bound books. Everything was meticulously organized. "Has anything been touched since her disappearance?" Christopher asked. "No, I gave strict instructions that nothing be disturbed." Christopher began his examination, moving methodically through the space. The desk drawers revealed the usual items: writing paper, envelopes, pens, a wax seal with the Ashford family crest. In the top right drawer, he found a leather-bound appointment book. He opened it carefully, scanning the entries. Most were routine: tea with friends, charitable committee meetings, appointments with her solicitor. But on November 23rd, the day she disappeared, there was a notation in elegant handwriting: 7 o'clock private matter. "Did your aunt have any appointment that evening?" Christopher asked, showing Victoria the entry. She leaned closer to look, and Christopher caught that lavender scent again. "No, not that she mentioned to me, and she certainly didn't leave the house to keep any appointment." Christopher continued his search, looking for the letter from Philadelphia, but found nothing. Either Margaret Ashford had taken it with her, or it had been destroyed. He moved to the fireplace, examining the cold ashes, but they revealed nothing useful. "Detective," Victoria said softly, "there's something else I should tell you. Something I haven't mentioned to anyone, not even Captain Morrison." Christopher turned to face her, noting the way she clasped her hands together, the slight tremor in her voice. "What is it?" 2 weeks before she disappeared, I overheard Aunt Margaret speaking to someone in this very room. The door was slightly ajar, and I was passing by. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard her say something that troubled me. "What did she say?" Victoria's dark eyes met his, filled with worry and confusion. She said, "The secret has been buried for 30 years. Perhaps it's best to let it remain so." And then the other person, I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, said something I couldn't quite hear. Aunt Margaret replied, "If the truth comes out, it could destroy everything we've built." Christopher felt his pulse quicken. This was more than a simple missing person case. "Did you see who she was speaking with?" "No." By the time I gathered the courage to knock and inquire if everything was well, the other person had left through the garden door. Victoria gestured to a door on the far wall that Christopher hadn't noticed. "That door leads directly to our private garden. Someone could enter or exit without going through the main house." "And this was 2 weeks ago?" "Yes, November 9th. Christopher walked to the garden door and tried the handle. Locked. "Do you have the key?" Aunt Margaret kept it with her always, on a small ring with 2 other keys. One for her bedroom, one for a safe she kept in her closet. "Show me her bedroom, please." Victoria led Christopher up the grand staircase to the 2nd floor, their footsteps muffled by the thick oriental runner that lined the hallway. Margaret Ashford's bedroom was at the end of the corridor, a spacious chamber decorated in shades of cream and gold, with heavy velvet curtains drawn back to reveal windows overlooking Beacon Hill's elegant streets. The room was immaculate, exactly as one would expect from a woman of Margaret's standing. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, its coverlet smooth and undisturbed. A vanity table held crystal perfume bottles, silver-backed brushes, and other personal items arranged with precise care. Christopher moved through the room with practiced observation, his trained eye searching for anything out of place. "The closet is here," Victoria said, opening a door to reveal a walk-in space lined with gowns, coats, and shelves of carefully folded items. At the back wall stood a small safe about 2 feet square, embedded into the wall itself. Christopher knelt before it, examining the lock. It was a quality piece, manufactured by the Herring Safe Company, not easily opened without the proper key or combination. "Your aunt never mentioned what she kept in here?" "Important documents, I assume. Family papers, perhaps jewelry." Victoria stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself as if warding off a chill. "She was a very private person about certain matters, Detective. There were parts of her life before my uncle's death that she never discussed. Christopher stood, brushing dust from his trousers. Miss Ashford, I need you to think carefully. In the weeks before her disappearance, did your aunt receive any other unusual correspondence? Any visitors who seemed out of the ordinary? Victoria moved to the window, gazing out at the fog that still clung to the city. The gray light softened her features, and Christopher found himself studying her profile, the elegant line of her neck, the way worry creased her brow. He forced himself to focus on the investigation. There was one visitor, Victoria said slowly, as if the memory was just surfacing. About 10 days ago. A woman, perhaps in her 40s, quite well-dressed, but not from Boston society. I would have remembered her. She arrived in a hansom cab and asked to see Aunt Margaret privately. They met in the drawing room for perhaps 30 minutes. Did your aunt tell you who she was? No. When I inquired, Aunt Margaret said only that it was an old acquaintance settling some business matters, but she seemed troubled after the woman left. Distracted. Victoria turned from the window, her dark eyes meeting his. I should have pressed her for more information. If I had, perhaps she wouldn't have disappeared. The guilt in her voice was palpable, and Christopher felt compelled to offer reassurance. He crossed the room, stopping a respectful distance from her. You mustn't blame yourself, Miss Ashford. Whatever circumstances led to your aunt's disappearance, they are not your fault. How can you be certain? What if my questions about her visitor caused her to act rashly? What if nothing? Christopher said gently but firmly. Your aunt is a grown woman who made her own choices. Our task now is to understand those choices and find her. He paused, then asked, This woman who visited, can you describe her? Victoria took a steadying breath, composing herself. Tall, perhaps 5 feet 8 inches, dark hair going gray, worn in an older style beneath a burgundy hat. Her dress was expensive but not fashionable by Boston standards. She carried herself with confidence, almost defiance, and she had unusual eyes, a very pale blue, almost gray. Christopher made detailed notes. Did you hear their conversation? No, the drawing room doors were closed, but when the woman left, I happened to be in the entrance hall. As Jameson showed her out, she turned back toward the drawing room and said loudly enough for me to hear, Think carefully about what I've told you, Margaret. Time changes nothing. The truth remains the truth. A chill ran down Christopher's spine. Pieces were beginning to form a picture, though still unclear. And your aunt's response? She didn't come out of the drawing room. I heard nothing more. Victoria's hands twisted together. Detective Hartwell, I have a terrible feeling that whatever secret my aunt was keeping, it led to her disappearance. And I fear that if we don't find her soon, something dreadful will happen. Christopher wanted to comfort her, to take her hands in his, and promise that everything would be well, but he maintained his professional distance. I will interview the staff now. Perhaps they noticed details you might have missed. In the meantime, I need you to try to remember anything else about that woman. Any other unusual occurrences, no matter how small they might seem. Of course. Victoria moved toward the door, then paused. Detective, may I ask you something? Certainly. Captain Morrison told me you're new to the detective division. This is your first major case. She studied his face with those penetrating dark eyes. Does that concern you? Christopher met her gaze steadily. Every detective has a first case, Miss Ashford. What matters is not experience, but dedication, intelligence, and the determination to find truth. Those qualities I possess in abundance. A small, unexpected smile touched Victoria's lips, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing warmth to her features. I believe you do, Detective Hartwell. I believe you do. Over the next 2 hours, Christopher interviewed each member of the household staff in the library, a comfortable room lined with books where he could speak to them privately. Jameson came first, his responses precise and measured. Mrs. Ashford was a creature of habit, the butler explained, seated stiffly in a leather chair. She rose at 7 each morning, took breakfast at 7:30, and spent her mornings attending to correspondence or charitable work. Afternoons were for social calls or receiving visitors. Evenings were quiet, usually spent with Miss Victoria. The night she disappeared, you locked all the doors at 10 o'clock as usual. Precisely at 10 o'clock, sir. I personally checked each door and window on the ground floor. All were secure. And the garden door in Mrs. Ashford's study? Jameson's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. That door has its own lock, separate from the household keys. Mrs. Ashford kept the only key. I cannot say whether it was locked that night, as it was within her private study. Did you notice anything unusual about Mrs. Ashford's behavior in the days before her disappearance? The butler hesitated and Christopher leaned forward. Jameson, anything you tell me could be crucial to finding her. She received several letters that week, sir, more than usual, and she seemed preoccupied, troubled even. On the morning of the 23rd, the day she disappeared, I brought her a letter at breakfast. When she opened it, her hands shook. She excused herself immediately and went to her study. The letter from Philadelphia? I believe so, sir. I noticed the postmark when I brought it on the tray. Christopher made notes, then looked up. Did anyone come to the house that day? Any visitors at all? No visitors, sir. Mrs. Ashford remained in her study most of the day. She took lunch there alone. Dinner was the only meal she shared with Miss Victoria. The lady's maid, Martha, a woman of perhaps 40 with kind eyes and graying brown hair, provided more personal details. Mrs. Ashford was good to me, sir. Been with her 15 years since before Mr. Ashford passed. She treated all of us with respect, not like some of the society ladies do. Did she confide in you about anything troubling her? Martha twisted her apron in her hands. Not in words, sir, but I knew her moods. Something was weighing heavy on her mind these past weeks. She'd stare out windows, lost in thought. Several times I found her looking at an old photograph, one she kept in her jewelry box. Christopher's attention sharpened. Do you know what photograph? A picture of a young woman, sir, from maybe 30 years ago, judging by the style of dress. Pretty girl, looked maybe 18 or 20. I asked Mrs. Ashford once who it was, and she said it was someone from long ago, before she was married. She got tears in her eyes when she said it, so I never asked again. Is this photograph still in her jewelry box? I don't know, sir. I haven't looked since she disappeared. Didn't feel right to go through her things. Christopher stood. Show me, please. They returned to Margaret's bedroom, and Martha opened the jewelry box on the vanity. Inside were several pieces of fine jewelry, pearl necklaces, gold bracelets, diamond earrings, but no photograph. It's gone, Martha whispered. She must have taken it with her. Christopher interviewed the cook, the 2 housemaids, and the stable boy who tended the small carriage house behind the mansion. None had seen or heard anything unusual on the night of Margaret's disappearance. It was as if she had simply vanished into the November fog. By early afternoon, Christopher found himself back in the drawing room with Victoria, reviewing what he had learned. She sat on the sofa, her posture perfect despite the evident strain, while he occupied the chair across from her. A 30-year-old secret, Christopher said, consulting his notes. A mysterious photograph, letters from Philadelphia, a visitor with pale eyes who spoke of unchanging truth, and your aunt's own words about something that could destroy everything if revealed. He looked up at Victoria. Miss Ashford, I need to know everything you can tell me about your aunt's life before she married your uncle. Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. I know very little. I'm ashamed to admit. Aunt Margaret came from a respectable but not wealthy family in Connecticut. She married Uncle Henry when she was 23, which was considered rather late for that era. The marriage was happy by all accounts, though they were never blessed with children. That's why she was so devoted to me after my parents died. Did she ever mention her life in Connecticut? Friends from that time? A romantic attachment before your uncle? Never. She was always entirely focused on the present and future, never dwelling on the past. Victoria paused, a memory seeming to surface. Although there was one time, perhaps 2 years ago, we were walking in the public garden, and we passed a young couple, newly engaged and obviously deeply in love. Aunt Margaret watched them with such sadness in her eyes. She said, "Some loves are not meant to be, Victoria. Sometimes duty and propriety must triumph over the heart." I asked what she meant, but she changed the subject. Christopher felt they were circling something significant, a truth buried deep. I need to contact the Philadelphia police, see if they can trace the origin of that letter. And I need to find that woman who visited 10 days ago. In a city like Boston, a stranger asking questions about old secrets should leave a trail. What can I do to help? Victoria asked, and the earnestness in her voice touched him. Think about everything your aunt owned. Everywhere she might have kept papers or documents. There must be something here that explains her past. Some clue to what she was hiding. Victoria stood, a determined set to her shoulders. The attic. There are trunks up there, old things from when Aunt Margaret first married Uncle Henry. I haven't been up there in years, but perhaps something in those trunks might help. Show me. They climbed a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. then up another even narrower flight to the attic. It was a vast space under the eaves, dusty and dim, filled with the accumulated possessions of decades. Trunks, boxes, old furniture, all covered in dust cloths and cobwebs. Victoria led him to a corner where 3 large trunks sat stacked. These belonged to Aunt Margaret. I remember her telling me once that they contained things from her youth, before Boston. Christopher opened the first trunk, finding it filled with old dresses from the 1860s, carefully preserved in tissue paper. The second contained books, journals, and personal items. The third was locked. "Do you have a key?" Christopher asked. "No. Perhaps it was on the ring Aunt Margaret kept with her." Christopher examined the lock. It was old, relatively simple. He withdrew a small set of tools from his pocket, instruments he had acquired during his training. Within 2 minutes, the lock clicked open. Inside the trunk was a treasure trove of the past. Letters tied with ribbons, more photographs, a dried bouquet of flowers, and at the very bottom, a leather journal embossed with the initials MC. "MC," Victoria said softly. Her maiden name was Colton, Margaret Colton. Christopher carefully lifted the journal, its leather worn soft with age. He opened it to the first page, where elegant handwriting proclaimed, "The private journal of Margaret Elizabeth Colton, begun this 15th day of April, 1865. 1865, Christopher murmured. She would have been about 18. He turned pages carefully, scanning the entries. They were the typical writings of a young woman. Descriptions of daily life, observations about friends and family, innocent and charming. But as he progressed through the journal, the tone began to change. June 3rd, 1865. Today I met him. I shall not write his name, for even putting it to paper feels dangerous and wonderful all at once. He is everything I never knew I wanted, everything I can never have." Christopher looked at Victoria, who had moved closer to read over his shoulder. Their faces were inches apart, and he could feel the warmth of her breath, see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "She was in love," Victoria whispered. Christopher continued reading, entry after entry, detailing a forbidden romance. The young Margaret never named her lover, referring to him only as Jay. The relationship was clearly intense, passionate, and secret. August 12th, 1865. Jay asked me to run away with him, to leave everything and start anew somewhere no one knows us. How my heart yearns to say yes. But I know the consequences. His family would disown him. Mine would be ruined. The scandal would destroy us both. Yet when he holds my hand and looks at me with those eyes, I almost believe love could conquer all. September 20th, 1865. It is decided. We will part. Jay is to marry the woman his family has chosen. I am to forget him and make a suitable match of my own. We met one last time today, in our secret place. We wept together, knowing we would never see each other again. He gave me his pocket watch as a keepsake. I gave him my heart, though I know I can never reclaim it. The journal entries became sparse after that, chronicling Margaret's return to conventional society, her eventual meeting with Henry Ashford, their courtship and marriage. The passionate young woman who had written of forbidden love was replaced by dutiful accounts of social obligations and household management. But near the end of the journal, one final entry stood out, dated November 1st, 1895, just 3 weeks before Margaret's disappearance. After 30 years of silence, a letter has arrived. Jay is dying. He wishes to see me one last time, to speak of what might have been. His wife passed 2 years ago, and he has no children. He says there is something I must know, something he should have told me long ago. Do I dare go to him? Do I risk everything I have built to say goodbye to the man I never stopped loving? Philadelphia seems both impossibly far and dangerously close. Christopher closed the journal carefully, his mind racing. Philadelphia. The mysterious letters. The secret that could destroy everything. It was all beginning to make sense. She went to him, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Margaret went to Philadelphia to see this man. This Jay. It appears so. Christopher agreed. But why the secrecy? Why not simply tell you she was taking a trip? Because she's Margaret Ashford, pillar of Boston society, widow of Henry Ashford. For her to visit a former love, even a dying one, would invite scandal and gossip. Victoria sank down onto an old trunk, her composure finally cracking. And I made it worse. I was so worried I insisted on involving the police. Now everyone will know she disappeared. The scandal she feared will happen anyway." Christopher knelt before her, setting the journal aside. "Miss Ashford, Victoria, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he saw tears threatening to spill. "You did the right thing. If your aunt is in Philadelphia with a dying man, she may need help. And if something else has happened, if there's more to this story, then involving the authorities was absolutely necessary. But her reputation is less important than her safety and well-being. Surely you can see that." He found himself taking her hand, a gesture of comfort that felt both natural and electric. "We will find her, and we will handle whatever we discover with discretion and care." Victoria's fingers curled around his, drawing strength from the contact. "You're very kind, Detective Hartwell. More than I expected." "Christopher," he said softly. "When we're alone, please call me Christopher." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Then you must call me Victoria." They remained like that for a moment, hands clasped in the dusty attic, surrounded by the remnants of Margaret's past. Christopher was acutely aware of how improper this was, how he should release her hand and step back, maintain professional distance. Yet he found he couldn't. Something about Victoria drew him, made him want to protect her, to ease her worry, to see her smile again. "Christopher," she said, testing his name on her lips. "What do we do now?" He reluctantly released her hand and stood. "I send a telegram to the Philadelphia police, asking them to investigate whether Margaret Ashford has been seen in the city. I also ask them to check hospitals and hotels. Meanwhile, I'll try to identify who Jay might be. The pocket watch Margaret mentioned, if she kept it, might bear initials or an inscription." They descended from the attic together, the journal and several letters clutched carefully in Christopher's hands. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows through the mansion's tall windows. As they reached the second-floor landing, Victoria paused, her hand resting on the polished banister. "The pocket watch," she said suddenly. "I think I may know where it is." Christopher turned to face her, hopeful. "Where?" "Aunt Margaret had a small music box in her bedroom, on the shelf above her writing desk. It's carved rosewood, very old. I remember once, years ago, I was admiring it, and she became quite protective, almost anxious. She told me never to open it, that it contained something precious and private." Victoria's eyes widened with realization. "I thought it strange at the time, but I never questioned her. Now I wonder if that's where she kept mementos of Jay." They hurried back to Margaret's bedroom, and Victoria pointed to a high shelf Christopher hadn't examined earlier. The music box sat there, ornate and beautiful, its dark wood gleaming even in the dim light. Christopher carefully lifted it down, feeling its weight, hearing something shift inside. The box wasn't locked. He opened the lid slowly, and a delicate melody began to play, a haunting waltz that seemed to belong to another era. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, lay a gentleman's gold pocket watch, its case engraved with intricate scrollwork. Beside it was a faded daguerreotype of a young man, handsome and serious, with dark hair and piercing eyes. Christopher picked up the watch with careful hands, turning it over. On the back, engraved in elegant script, were the initials JMT and a date, June 1st, 1865. "JMT," Christopher murmured. "Now we have his initials." Victoria leaned close to examine the photograph. "He was very handsome. I can see why Aunt Margaret loved him." She paused, studying the image more intently. "Christopher, look at his eyes. There's something familiar about them." Christopher held the daguerreotype up to the fading light. The young man stared back at them across 3 decades, frozen in time. There was indeed something arresting about his gaze, an intensity that transcended the limitations of the old photographic medium. "We need to find out who JMT was or is," Christopher said, carefully placing the watch and photograph in his coat pocket. "If he's dying in Philadelphia, there should be records, perhaps hospital admissions or death notices in the newspapers." "It's nearly 4 o'clock, Victoria observed, glancing at the ornate clock on the mantel. "The telegraph office will be open for a few more hours, and the Boston Public Library maintains archives of Philadelphia newspapers. We could search there." Christopher was impressed by her quick thinking. "We? Miss Ashford, Victoria, this is police business. I cannot ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm insisting." Her chin lifted with determination, and Christopher saw steel beneath her gentle exterior. "Aunt Margaret is my family. I have every right to help find her. Besides, you're new to Boston society, new to detective work. I know people. I have resources you don't. Together, we'll be more effective than either of us alone." Christopher found himself smiling despite the gravity of the situation. "You're quite formidable when you set your mind to something." "I've had to be," Victoria said quietly. "When my parents died, I was 21 years old, alone, except for Aunt Margaret. I learned that waiting passively for others to solve problems helps no one. Action, even imperfect action, is better than paralysis." "Very well," Christopher conceded, "but we must be discreet. If word spreads that we're investigating together, unchaperoned, it could damage your reputation." A wry smile touched Victoria's lips. "Detective Hartwell, we're searching for my missing aunt who apparently ran off to see a former lover. I think my reputation is already in precarious position. What's a bit more scandal?" Within the hour, they were seated in a hansom cab, traveling through Boston's busy streets toward the telegraph office. The fog had lifted somewhat, revealing a sky heavy with clouds that promised more rain. Victoria sat across from Christopher, her green dress a splash of color in the cab's dim interior, her face thoughtful as she watched the city pass by. "Tell me about yourself," she said suddenly. "I've shared my family's secrets with you. It seems only fair I know something of the man investigating them." Christopher was surprised by the personal turn in conversation, but found he didn't mind. "There's not much to tell. I'm from a modest family here in Boston. My father was a school teacher, my mother a seamstress. They both passed from influenza 3 years ago, within days of each other." "I'm so sorry," Victoria said softly, genuine sympathy in her eyes. "Thank you. Their deaths are what led me to police work, actually. I was studying literature at Harvard, planning to teach like my father. But when they died, I realized how fragile life is, how quickly things can change. I wanted to do something that mattered, something that helped people in their darkest moments." He paused, looking out at the passing buildings. "So I left university and joined the police force. That took courage," Victoria observed. "Leaving behind one path to forge another." "Or foolishness," Christopher said with a slight smile. "My professors thought I was throwing away my future, but I've never regretted it. Even though I started as a simple patrol officer, walking beats in the rain, I knew I was doing meaningful work. And now you're a detective, solving mysteries, finding missing people." Victoria's expression grew warmer. "I think your parents would be proud of the man you've become." The sincerity in her voice touched something deep in Christopher's chest. "I hope so." They reached the telegraph office, and Christopher composed a careful message to the Philadelphia Police Department, requesting information about any recent hospital admissions or deaths of a man with the initials JMT, likely in his 50s, possibly arrived from Connecticut or staying in local hotels. He also asked them to check if a Margaret Ashford had been seen in the city. "How long before we receive a response?" Victoria asked as they left the office. "If they reply quickly, perhaps by tomorrow morning. Telegraph communications have improved significantly in recent years." Christopher checked his pocket watch, the one that had belonged to his father. "It's nearly 5 o'clock. The library will still be open for another 2 hours. Shall we search their newspaper archives?" Victoria nodded, and they walked the few blocks to the Boston Public Library, a magnificent building that had opened just a year earlier. The reading room was warm and well lit, a sanctuary of knowledge where they could search for answers. A helpful librarian directed them to the periodicals section, where bound volumes of various newspapers were stored. Christopher requested Philadelphia papers from the past 2 months, and soon they were seated at a long table, surrounded by heavy volumes, searching through page after page of small print. It was tedious work, made more pleasant by Victoria's presence across the table. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and Christopher would feel that now familiar flutter in his chest. He had to remind himself repeatedly to focus on the task at hand, not on the way lamplight brought out auburn highlights in her hair, or how her brow furrowed adorably when she concentrated. "Christopher," Victoria said, after nearly an hour of searching, her voice tight with excitement, "I think I found something." He moved quickly to her side of the table, leaning over her shoulder to see what she had discovered. The proximity brought that lavender scent again, and he had to force himself to concentrate on the newspaper page before him. Victoria's finger pointed to a small notice in the Philadelphia Inquirer, dated November 18, 1895, just 5 days before Margaret's disappearance. Jonathan Michael Thornton, aged 53, of Chestnut Street, Philadelphia, has been admitted to Pennsylvania hospital with severe pneumonia. Mr. Thornton, a respected banker and widower, is reported to be in grave condition. Visiting hours are limited to immediate family. Jonathan Michael Thornton. Christopher read aloud. JMT. It has to be him. The timing fits perfectly, Victoria said, her voice trembling slightly. He was admitted on the 18th. Aunt Margaret received the letter from Philadelphia on the 23rd. She disappeared that same night. Christopher's mind raced, piecing together the timeline. She received word that he was dying, that he wanted to see her. She couldn't leave immediately without arousing suspicion, so she made arrangements, perhaps sent a reply saying she would come. Then, on the evening of the 23rd, she left. But how? All the doors were locked from the inside. Christopher thought back to his examination of the house. The garden door in her study, she had the key. She could have left through the garden, walked to the street and hired a cab. If she did it late at night, after Jameson had locked the main doors, no one would have known. But why not simply tell me she was traveling? Why the secrecy? Because she was going to see a man she had loved, a man she had promised to forget when she married your uncle. Even though both her husband and Thornton's wife are deceased, even though 30 years have passed, the scandal would have been significant. Christopher straightened, his detective's mind analyzing the situation. She chose to disappear rather than explain herself. She probably planned to return before anyone noticed she was gone. Victoria stood, agitation clear in her movements. Then why hasn't she returned? It's been 4 days. If she simply went to see a dying man, she should be back by now. It was a valid question, and Christopher had no good answer. Perhaps Thornton's condition worsened, and she felt she couldn't leave. Perhaps there were complications with travel. Or perhaps... He hesitated, not wanting to voice darker possibilities. Perhaps something happened to her in Philadelphia. Victoria finished, her face pale. Something that prevented her return. We don't know that, Christopher said firmly, though the same concern gnawed at him. Tomorrow morning, when the telegraph office opens, we should have a response from the Philadelphia police. They can check Pennsylvania hospital, verify if Thornton is still there, if Margaret has been seen. Victoria sank back into her chair, looking suddenly exhausted. The strain of the past days was evident in the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Christopher felt a powerful urge to comfort her, to pull her into his arms and promise that everything would be well. Instead, he maintained propriety, simply resting a hand gently on her shoulder. You've been very brave through all of this, he said softly. Your aunt is fortunate to have someone who cares so deeply. Victoria looked up at him, and in her eyes, Christopher saw not just worry but something else, something warmer and more personal. And I'm fortunate to have you helping me, Christopher. I don't know what I would have done if Captain Morrison had assigned someone else to this case, someone less understanding, less kind. Her hand came up to rest on his where it lay on her shoulder, and the touch sent electricity through Christopher's entire body. They remained like that for a long moment, surrounded by books and newspapers, the library growing quiet as other patrons departed for the evening. We should go, Christopher said reluctantly, his voice slightly rough. It's getting late, and you need rest. He escorted Victoria home in another handsome cab, the evening having turned dark and cold. When they arrived at the Ashford mansion, he walked her to the door, suddenly aware of how much this felt like something other than a professional investigation. It felt like he was courting her, this beautiful, intelligent woman who had somehow become central to his thoughts in less than a day. Thank you for today, Victoria said on the doorstep, her breath visible in the cold air. For taking me seriously, for including me in the search. Many men wouldn't have. You've proven invaluable, Christopher said honestly. Your knowledge, your insight, your determination. This investigation would be far less advanced without you. Victoria smiled, and even in the dim light from the gas lamp it was radiant. Will you return tomorrow, when you receive the telegraph response? The moment I have news, Christopher promised. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but Victoria's voice stopped him. Christopher? He turned back. Yes? Be careful. I have a feeling this case is more complicated than it appears. If Aunt Margaret was keeping secrets for 30 years, if there's something that could destroy everything she built, then there may be others who want those secrets to remain buried. It was a sobering thought, and Christopher nodded seriously. I will. And you be careful as well. Keep the doors locked, and if anything unusual happens, send for me immediately. That night, Christopher lay awake in his small apartment, his mind refusing to settle. The case had expanded far beyond a simple missing person investigation. It now involved forbidden love, decades-old secrets, a dying man in Philadelphia, and a woman who had risked everything to see him one last time. But beneath the professional aspects of the case, Christopher had to acknowledge a personal truth that complicated everything. He was developing feelings for Victoria Ashford, feelings that went far beyond professional respect or sympathetic concern. When he closed his eyes, he saw her face, heard her voice, remembered the touch of her hand on his. It was foolish, he told himself. She was from Boston's upper class, a woman of wealth and social standing. He was a detective from a modest background, with uncertain prospects and no family connections. Even if his feelings were returned, which he couldn't assume, a relationship between them would face significant obstacles. Yet he couldn't deny the connection he felt, the way something in his chest tightened when she smiled, the protective instinct that surged whenever she showed vulnerability. In one day, Victoria had become more than just a client or a witness. She had become important to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The fog finally lifted. Christopher was at the telegraph office when it opened at 8 o'clock, anxious for a response from Philadelphia. The clerk handed him a telegram that had arrived early that morning, and Christopher's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The message was brief but illuminating. Jonathan Thornton, Pennsylvania Hospital. Critical condition. Stop woman matching Margaret Ashford description, seen at hospital multiple times past 4 days. Stop registered at Continental Hotel Room 247. Stop no response to door knock since yesterday evening. Stop requesting instruction. Stop Sergeant Davies, Philadelphia PD. Christopher read the telegram 3 times, his detective's mind analyzing every word. Margaret had indeed gone to Philadelphia. She had been at the hospital with Thornton, but now she wasn't responding at her hotel. Why? He needed to go to Philadelphia himself. This was beyond what could be handled through telegrams and third-party reports, but he couldn't leave Victoria without explanation. And more than that, he didn't want to leave her behind. She deserved to be part of this, to know what had happened to her aunt. Christopher made a decision that was both professional and deeply personal. He sent a telegram to Captain Morrison, explaining the developments and requesting permission to travel to Philadelphia to locate Margaret Ashford. Then he hired a cab to take him to the Ashford mansion. Jameson admitted him with his usual formal courtesy, and moments later, Victoria appeared in the entrance hall, her face lighting up when she saw him. She wore a dress of deep blue today, and Christopher thought he had never seen anyone more beautiful. "You have news," she said, reading his expression. "I do. Is there somewhere private we can talk?" She led him to the morning room, a small, bright space overlooking the garden. Once the door was closed, Christopher showed her the telegram. Victoria read it quickly, her hand rising to her throat. "She's in Philadelphia. She's been at the hospital. But why isn't she responding at the hotel? I don't know, and I need to find out. I'm requesting permission from Captain Morrison to travel to Philadelphia myself." Christopher paused, then took a breath and made an offer that crossed several professional lines. "Victoria, I think you should come with me." Her eyes widened. "To Philadelphia? Your aunt may need you. If she's in some kind of trouble, seeing you might help. And—" He struggled to find the right words. "I think you have a right to be there when we find her, to hear whatever truth has been hidden all these years. But the impropriety of us traveling together, unchaperoned, could be managed," Christopher said firmly. "We would take separate train compartments, stay at separate hotels. I would ensure everything was above reproach. Or if you prefer, we could bring someone with us as a chaperone. Martha, perhaps, or another trusted servant." Victoria moved to the window, looking out at the garden where frost still clung to the remaining autumn flowers. Christopher watched her, waiting, hoping she would agree, while simultaneously wondering if he was making a terrible mistake. Taking her to Philadelphia, spending days in her company, growing closer to her while navigating a complex investigation, all of it seemed fraught with professional and personal danger. But when Victoria turned back to him, her decision was clear in her eyes. "I'll come with you. I'll bring Martha as a chaperone, as you suggested. When can we leave?" By early afternoon, they were aboard the Pennsylvania Railroad's express train to Philadelphia, the locomotive's rhythmic churning carrying them southward through the November landscape. Christopher had received Captain Morrison's approval, though not without a stern warning about maintaining propriety and solving the case quickly. Victoria sat in the ladies' compartment with Martha, while Christopher occupied a seat in the adjacent car, though he checked on them frequently throughout the journey. The countryside rolled past the windows, farms and small towns giving way to forests stripped bare by autumn, their skeletal branches reaching toward a gray sky. Christopher found his thoughts drifting constantly to Victoria, to the way her eyes had shone with gratitude when he'd suggested she accompany him, to the brief touch of her hand as she'd boarded the train. He forced himself to focus on the case. Jonathan Thornton was dying, perhaps already dead. Margaret had been with him but was now not responding at her hotel. The possibilities ranged from innocent explanations to darker scenarios Christopher didn't want to contemplate. Whatever awaited them in Philadelphia, he needed to be prepared. The train arrived at Broad Street Station just after 6 o'clock in the evening, the massive terminal bustling with travelers despite the late hour. Christopher arranged for their luggage to be sent to their respective hotels. Victoria and Martha to the elegant Bellevue Stratford on Broad Street, himself to a more modest establishment nearby. He then hired 2 hansom cabs, one for the ladies and one for himself. "We'll meet at the Continental Hotel at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," Christopher told Victoria as Martha supervised the loading of their luggage. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow may be difficult." Victoria nodded, but as Martha climbed into their cab, she lingered a moment longer. "Christopher, thank you. For everything. For believing that finding Aunt Margaret mattered. For treating her disappearance with respect rather than scandal. For allowing me to be part of this. You've been essential," Christopher said softly. "I couldn't have gotten this far without you." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Christopher felt the pull between them growing stronger, more undeniable. Then Victoria turned and climbed into the cab, and he watched it pull away into the Philadelphia twilight before heading to his own hotel. Sleep came fitfully that night. Christopher's mind churned through possibilities, preparing for what they might find at the Continental Hotel at Pennsylvania Hospital. He rose early, dressed carefully in his best suit, and was waiting outside the Continental Hotel when Victoria and Martha arrived precisely at 8 o'clock. The Continental was a grand establishment on Chestnut Street, its marble facade and ornate entrance speaking of luxury and discretion. Christopher approached the front desk, showing his police credentials to the clerk, a thin man with spectacles and an air of nervous efficiency. "I'm Detective Christopher Hartwell from the Boston Police Department. I'm here regarding one of your guests, Mrs. Margaret Ashford, room 247. The clerk's expression grew troubled. "Ah, yes. We've been concerned about Mrs. Ashford. She hasn't been seen since yesterday morning, hasn't responded to our knocks, and hasn't taken any meals. We were considering entering the room to check on her welfare." "I'll need to see the room immediately," Christopher said firmly. "Of course, Detective. I'll have the manager accompany you with a key." Within minutes, Christopher, Victoria, and the hotel manager were climbing the stairs to the second floor, Martha remaining discreetly in the lobby. Victoria's hand gripped the banister tightly, her face pale with worry. Christopher wanted to offer reassurance but couldn't, not when he didn't know what they would find. Room 247 was at the end of a quiet corridor. The manager knocked firmly. "Mrs. Ashford, this is the hotel manager. We need to check on your welfare." Silence. The manager looked at Christopher, who nodded. The key turned in the lock and the door swung open. The room was empty. Not just unoccupied, but clearly abandoned. The bed was made, personal items were gone, and a single envelope lay on the writing desk, addressed in elegant handwriting. "To Miss Victoria Ashford, in care of Detective Christopher Hartwell." Victoria gasped softly and moved toward the envelope, but Christopher gently stopped her. "Let me examine the room first." He searched methodically, looking for any clue about where Margaret might have gone. The wardrobe held nothing. The washstand was dry. There was no luggage, no personal effects. It was as if Margaret Ashford had checked out, but without informing the hotel. Finally, Christopher nodded to Victoria. "You may open it." With trembling hands, Victoria broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the page, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. Christopher moved to her side, reading over her shoulder. "My dearest Victoria," the letter began in Margaret's distinctive hand. "If you are reading this, then you have followed me to Philadelphia, and for that I must beg your forgiveness. I never intended to cause you worry or to involve the authorities in what I thought would be a private farewell, but I underestimated your love for me and your determination to find answers. By now you know about Jonathan. Yes, I loved him once. loved him with all the passion and innocence of youth. We met in the summer of 1865, two young people from different worlds who found in each other something rare and precious. His family was wealthy and influential. Mine was respectable but modest. When our attachment became known, both families forbade it. Jonathan was promised to another, a woman of his own social standing, and I was urged to forget him. We tried to part, truly we did, but love does not yield so easily to duty. In our final meeting, I discovered I was carrying his child. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, and Christopher felt his own shock ripple through him. I never told Jonathan. How could I burden him with such knowledge when he was already being forced into a loveless marriage? Instead, I went away, to a distant cousin in Ohio, and there I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl in the spring of 1866. I named her Sarah. I held her for one day, memorized every feature of her perfect face, and then I did what I believed was right. I gave her to a childless couple who promised to love her and raise her well. They were good people, Victoria, a minister and his wife, and I knew they would give Sarah the life I could not. I returned home, and within a year I met your Uncle Henry. He was kind and good, and though I could never love him the way I had loved Jonathan, I built a life with him, a respectable life, a life free from scandal. But I never forgot Sarah, never stopped wondering about her, hoping she was happy. 3 weeks ago I received a letter from a woman named Catherine Bennett. She is Sarah's daughter, my granddaughter, though she knew nothing of me until her mother, my Sarah, died 6 months ago. In her final days, Sarah told Catherine the truth about her birth and gave her the few items I had left with her, a locket with my initials and a letter explaining everything. Catherine came to Boston to find me. She wasn't angry or demanding, merely curious about her heritage. We met several times, and I saw in her face echoes of Jonathan, of myself, of the love that created her mother. I told her everything, and she understood. She asked for nothing except to know her history. Then the letter came from Philadelphia. Jonathan was dying. He had somehow learned about Sarah, had known all these years, and never told me, believing he was protecting me from scandal. Now, facing death, he wanted to meet Catherine, to see the granddaughter he had never known existed. I brought Catherine to Philadelphia. We have been at Jonathan's bedside these past 4 days. He passed away peacefully last night, having finally met Catherine, having made peace with the choices we made so long ago. Victoria, I am writing this before Catherine and I depart for New York, where she lives with her husband and children. I'm going to spend some time with her, to build the relationship I was denied with Sarah. I will return to Boston within 2 weeks, and then I will face whatever consequences my actions bring. I know this revelation will shock you. I know the scandal it could cause if made public. But I trust you, dear niece, who has been like a daughter to me, to handle this knowledge with wisdom and discretion. You are strong, stronger than I ever was. You will know what to do. Please forgive an old woman for clinging to one last chance at happiness, at family, before the years claim me entirely. And please do not judge too harshly the choices made by a frightened young woman in 1866. With all my love and deepest regret for the worry I have caused, Margaret. Victoria lowered the letter, tears streaming freely now. Christopher pulled out his handkerchief and offered it to her, his own heart heavy with the weight of Margaret's story. A granddaughter, Victoria whispered. All these years Aunt Margaret had a granddaughter she couldn't acknowledge. She did what she thought was necessary to protect everyone. Christopher said gently, in that era, an illegitimate child would have ruined not just her life but the child's as well. Giving Sarah up for adoption was perhaps the most loving choice she could make. Victoria wiped her eyes, then looked at Christopher. What do we do now? Do we report this to Captain Morrison? Do we make it public? Christopher considered carefully. We report that we found Margaret, that she is safe and well, visiting family in New York, and will return to Boston shortly. The details of why she left, the circumstances of her past, those are private family matters that need not become public record. But the investigation, the police involvement, was entirely justified based on the information we had. You were worried about your aunt's safety. We investigated and found her safe. That's all anyone needs to know. Christopher held her gaze steadily. Victoria, I became a detective to help people, not to expose their private pain to public scrutiny. Your aunt's secrets are safe with me. Fresh tears welled in Victoria's eyes, but these seemed to be tears of gratitude. You are a remarkable man, Christopher Hartwell. They left the hotel and spent the rest of the morning at Pennsylvania Hospital, where the staff confirmed that Jonathan Thornton had indeed passed away the previous night, and that 2 women, one elderly and one younger, had been with him at the end. The hospital had no forwarding information for the women, as Christopher had expected. By early afternoon, they were back on the train to Boston, the case officially closed. Victoria sat with Martha in the ladies' compartment, but this time Christopher joined them. Propriety be damned. There was too much to discuss, too much shared experience to maintain formal distance. "What will you tell people?" Christopher asked as the train rolled northward. "Your friends' society, when they ask about your aunt?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching the countryside pass. Martha dozed in the corner, having exhausted herself with worry over the past days. "I'll tell them she needed to attend to urgent family business and will return soon. It's the truth, just not the complete truth. And when she returns, will you speak to her about all of this?" "Yes." Victoria's voice was firm. "I'll tell her I know everything, that I understand, that I'm not judging her. And I'll ask to meet Catherine. After all, if she's my aunt's granddaughter, that makes her family. I'd like to know her." Christopher felt a surge of admiration for Victoria's generous heart. "Your aunt is fortunate to have you." "We're fortunate to have each other," Victoria corrected. She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes serious. "Christopher, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Anything. Over these past days, working together to find Aunt Margaret, I've felt something, a connection between us. Have you felt it too, or am I being foolish?" Christopher's heart began to race. This was the moment, the crossing of a line from professional to personal. He could deflect, maintain propriety, keep his feelings buried, or he could be honest. "I've felt it from the first moment I saw you standing by the window in your drawing room," he admitted, his voice low. "You took my breath away then, and you've occupied my thoughts every moment since. But Victoria, I'm a detective from a modest background. You're from one of Boston's finest families. The obstacles between us are insignificant compared to what we've just learned about Aunt Margaret and Jonathan," Victoria interrupted. "They let propriety and family expectations keep them apart, and they lost 30 years together. They lost their daughter. I won't make the same mistake." Christopher stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I have feelings for you too, Christopher. Strong feelings. And I'd like to see where they might lead, if you're willing." He reached across the small space between their seats and took her hand, no longer caring about propriety or appearances. "I'm more than willing. I'm honored. But we should proceed carefully, properly. I want to court you the right way, with respect and intention." Victoria's smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." They talked for hours as the train carried them home, about their hopes and fears, their pasts and possible futures. Martha woke eventually and, seeing them holding hands, smiled knowingly, but said nothing. By the time they reached Boston, as evening fell over the city, Christopher and Victoria had formed an understanding, an agreement to explore the feelings between them. 2 weeks later, Margaret Ashford returned to Boston, and the reunion between aunt and niece was tender and tearful. Victoria kept her promise, telling Margaret she knew everything and understood. The scandal Victoria had feared never materialized, as Christopher had ensured the official police report contained only the necessary facts. Missing person located, safe and well, no foul play. Margaret met with Christopher privately to thank him for his discretion. "You could have exposed everything, destroyed my reputation," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why didn't you?" "Because some stories deserve to remain private," Christopher replied. "And because Victoria loves you. That was reason enough to protect you." Margaret studied him with keen eyes. "You love her too. I can see it in how you look at her." Christopher didn't deny it. "I do. With your permission, I'd like to continue courting her, with the intention of marriage when the time is right." "You have my blessing," Margaret said warmly, "and my eternal gratitude." Over the following months, Christopher and Victoria's relationship deepened. He was promoted to senior detective based on his successful handling of his first major case. She introduced him to Boston society, and while some raised eyebrows at the match between a society lady and a detective, most were charmed by Christopher's intelligence and integrity. In the spring of 1896, on a day when apple blossoms scented the air in the public garden, Christopher proposed to Victoria beside the pond where swans glided gracefully. She said yes without hesitation, and when they kissed, sealing their engagement, Christopher thought of Margaret and Jonathan, of love delayed and lost, and felt grateful beyond measure that he and Victoria had found each other in time. They married that June in a ceremony at Trinity Church, with Margaret beaming in the front row and Captain Morrison attending as Christopher's guest. Catherine Bennett traveled from New York with her family, meeting Victoria for the first time and forming an instant connection. As Christopher and Victoria exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the years to come, he reflected on the case that had brought them together. What had started as a simple missing person investigation had revealed secrets spanning decades, had exposed the consequences of choices made in the name of propriety and duty, and had ultimately led him to the love of his life. Standing at the altar, holding Victoria's hands as she smiled at him with those beautiful dark eyes, Christopher silently thanked Margaret for disappearing that November night. Her search for closure with her past had given him a future more wonderful than he had ever imagined possible. The reception was held at the Ashford mansion, transformed with flowers and music into a place of joy. As Christopher and Victoria took their first dance as husband and wife, moving in graceful circles across the polished floor, he leaned close to whisper in her ear, "I love you, Mrs. Hartwell." "And I love you, Detective Hartwell," she whispered back, her eyes shining with happiness. "My brilliant detective who solved not just his first case, but the mystery of my heart." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by friends and family, blessed by love found and secrets kept, ready to begin their new life together. And if sometimes Christopher's thoughts returned to that foggy November morning, when he had first walked into the Ashford mansion to investigate a disappearance, he could only feel gratitude for the journey that had led him here, to this moment, to this woman, to this perfect beginning. In the years that followed, Christopher built a distinguished career as one of Boston's finest detectives, solving cases with the intelligence and integrity that had marked his first investigation. Victoria worked alongside him when she could, her sharp mind and social connections proving invaluable. Together they formed a partnership both professional and personal, bound by love and mutual respect. Margaret lived to see her first great-great-grandchild, a girl named Sarah, in honor of the daughter she had lost so long ago. Catherine became a regular visitor to Boston, and the relationship between Margaret and her granddaughter brought healing to old wounds. And every November, on the anniversary of the day they met, Christopher would take Victoria to the public garden, and they would walk hand in hand through the paths where couples strolled and lovers met, grateful for the case that had brought them together, for the love that had grown from mystery and investigation, and for the life they had built together. The detective had indeed solved his first case, but more importantly, he had found something far more precious than any solution to a mystery. He had found his home, his partner, his heart's true match, in the woman who had appeared with secrets in her hands and love in her eyes. And that was a case that would never be closed, a story that would continue to unfold with each passing year, a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives together.